Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are calling in from. We'll wait just a moment as all of our attendees move over from the waiting room. Thank you for joining us. We are waiting just a minute as all of our attendees move into the main Zoom room after waiting patiently. All right, great. Let's begin. Welcome to today's webinar, the Apex COVID-19 Business Recovery Task Force, Resources for B2B and B2C Exhibitions Accepted Practices Guide. My name is Marshall Bradshaw. I'm a member of the EIC staff. Before the session begins, I have some important housekeeping notes for you. The presentation is being recorded and will run approximately 90 minutes, including a question and answer time at the end. It will also be available on the EIC YouTube channel. All attendees watching live today will receive CEs, which will appear on your account approximately 1 week after the webinar. Attendees can listen to the webinar through their computers or by dialing in using the number and passcode provided by the Zoom software. We also welcome you to utilize the closed captioning function. Just click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. You'll find the link to the live subtitles. If you have any questions, you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to submit them. We encourage you to submit your questions using the question and answer panel, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Now, it's separate from the chat, but feel free to say hello in the chat before entering your question in the Q&A panel instead. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And now, I will hand it over to Events Industry Council CEO, Amy Calvert. Amy?
Thanks so much, Marshall, and thank you to all of you who are joining us today from across the globe. It's really wonderful to be with you and to see, the spirit of unity that this webinar and this resource represents. On behalf of all of our global federation of members, the 30 members that comprise EIC, I just want to take a minute to recognize the great work of this task force. They have done some amazing work over the past 12 months, bringing you a body of work that really represents a global collaboration of resources that are really meant to work together. I think if we could go on to the next slide, you can see that over the past 12 months, this task force has been hard at work preparing some tremendous resources that are really living work streams and meant to support and work together. And one of the key themes that you'll find in all of these resources is this notion of partnership. And we're really trying to bring forward a notion of shared risks, shared objectives, and really talk about how through this doubling down on partnerships and this commitment to communication, we can put forth the best outcomes, not only for our workforce, but ultimately for the future of our industry. So today's webinar, you are very fortunate to have some tremendous professionals that have done really, really great work in preparing this next resource, which is on B2B and B2C exhibitions. What we all really need to know now as we start to move forward through recovery and resilience. And you're very fortunate to have a fantastic moderator, Cathy Breden, who is the COO of IAEE and the CEO of the Seer Research Foundation, is also the incoming chair of EIC. We're very fortunate to have Cathy's support and leadership, and I know she'll do a tremendous job in moderating this panel. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cathy. And again, just thank you all so much for being a part of this discussion and a part of this journey that we're on together. Cathy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Amy. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. We have a great webinar and with really some great experts in the exhibitions and events industry. But before we get started with the panel, I just wanted to give you a perspective of what's going on and what the economic impact has been of the exhibitions industry virtually being shut down since last March. In the US alone, the exhibitions industry, a huge economic generator. In 2019, the economic impact was $101 billion. And if COVID had not happened, it would have increased to our best estimate to $105 billion annually. And we know what happened last year in March. Few shows were held and the impact declined by about $85 billion. Globally, UFI estimates that the $325 billion exhibitions industry contracted by about 68% compared to 2019. And then Seer has been conducting some pulse polls since April of last year. And we can see that 73% of executives had to make some very difficult decisions about what they were going to be doing with their events. 73%, as I said, had to make that decision on whether to postpone or to cancel their events this year. And as of right now, and this is always changing, so 45% have postponed until later this year, and then 41% had already canceled. So certainly, a tremendous impact on, exactly what is going on in the industry. We are seeing that 76% of those that did postpone are looking at some time in Q3, Q4 of this year. So we really do expect that, by the end of this year, the industry will truly be up and running again. Could you go to the next slide, please? Seer produces the Seer Index report every year, and it measures 4 different data points: net square feet of exhibit space sold, the number of attendees, the amount of revenue that was generated, as well as the number of exhibitors. And it breaks it down by 14 different sectors. We unfortunately did not publish that publication last year because really what would we be able to say? And we would not be able to give an accurate forecast of what was going to happen over the next 3 years. So we are planning on releasing it in late August of this year, so be on the lookout for it. Next slide. So what is the most likely scenario? I get asked this question all the time. When is the exhibition industry going to be back? And what I can say is that the worst is truly behind us. Whereas in December of last year, I would say that I was hopeful. January, I was cautiously optimistic. And now I am optimistic. We have been watching it very closely. We have always said that the vaccinations and the rollout of those vaccines was very important for the recovery, as well as the downward part of the cases that we were seeing. And so we really do think that, the vaccines are going to be widely distributed, even probably before Q3, at least here in the United States. And when we look at the GDP, the index always has historically been tracking GDP growth. And we look at what happened in 2020. It declined 3.5%. You can see that it's below the benchmark line of 0. And then in 2021, 5.0%. We just got new numbers out from the Bureau of Economics. And that's a really good indicator. And then by 2022, 3.8% is what's estimated for real GDP growth. And then if you look at what happened with the index in 2020, you'll see that 77.6, it declined by 77.6%. And then 2021, forecasting 57.3%. And then in 2022, we'll only be down by 10% of what we were over 2019. So by 2023, we do anticipate that we will see recovery. Next slide, please. Seer on its website has a tool for exhibition organizers. I encourage you to enter your data in there. The data is not ever released except in the aggregate in the Seer Index report. And you will get a couple of really good spreadsheets and infographics measuring your event against your industry sector, as well as against the industry overall. So that's a little bit of where we are in this overview. And now we're going to move on to this great panel, as I said. First off will be Kristen, who will give us an overview of the new guidebook. And then Julie Smith will give us the official services contractor. Certainly, the official services contractor has been impacted dramatically, as has the DMO community. Sheila will give us that perspective. And then Frank, who wins the award because it's very early morning in Korea right now, will give us that venue perspective. And which is especially exciting because our colleagues in Asia have been able to get events off of the ground, and they are holding events right now. And then Stephanie Jones is going to give us her perspective on the West Tech show. And then Adam Anderson with Informa Markets. Informa is a global organization, and they have been certainly successful in producing events. And then, of course, many of you know Mark Mulligan with IMEX Group. IMEX produces 2 shows a year, one in Frankfurt, Germany, and the other one in Las Vegas. And we're excited to hear from him about what the plans are for IMEX. So this presentation is going to be an hour in length, and then we're extending it by 30 minutes for Q&A. So make sure that you're adding your questions into that Q&A. So we're going to start with Kristen, and she is going to tell us about the process that give us an overview of the new resource. And so Kristen, I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
Great, thank you, Cathy. I am thrilled to be able to present and honored that I was asked to go through this book with you. It's a bit of a labor of love, I think everyone would say, on this task force. So we're very pleased to be able to present this to you today. If we could move on to the next page, please. So as we go through this book, again, please feel free to put your questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty in the Q&A portion, and we'll try to address this at the end of the presentation. So if we could move forward a couple pages, to page 3, please. Thank you. So this book is similar to what you've seen with some of the other working groups. What I will say about this task force and really what resonates with all of the subgroups as we put together this flipping book is the resiliency and the adaptability of our industry. It's really remarkable how everyone has come together, and that's what makes us such a strong community. We do have a call for action that's repeated throughout this document that is asking for continued transparency, collaboration, and most importantly, the duty of care that we bring as we proceed with holding events and exhibitions. You can turn the page, please. Thank you. Here we've reiterated the events industry, our guiding principles, our 6 guiding principles for recovery, and this is resonating throughout the guidebook. Next page, please. We've, with our partners, as Cathy mentioned, the Seer reports, UFI and GBTA, we wanted to make sure that we identified the various stakeholders and listed the resources that that support the state of all of our stakeholders as we put together these events. So that includes our event owners, our event organizers, our attendees. If you move to the next page, please. Our exhibitors and sponsors, venues, contractors, and other suppliers, and exhibition planning logistics. We wanted to make sure that we touched upon every group that has been impacted as we do move forward with hosting events, and the resources that are available from our venues, from the IAVM, ESCA, and their resources on how to produce an event moving forward. Next page, please. What I think, and what we have found through this period is our service providers have been very innovative in putting together resources for us. And we've listed some of those resources here in a brief description of what those entail. So it's exciting. So what I think that this period has brought forward to us is a sense of innovation, is how are we coping? How are we going to move forward as an industry? And our service providers have really supported us in that effort. Sorry, can you flip back one page? I don't want to miss one of our very important, I don't want to underestimate, and Cathy touched on this, the significant impact that the pandemic has had on our workforce in our industry. And I don't want to underestimate, and I want to highlight some of the resources that we've included here, so that as we do return to work, as we do return to hosting events, what is the impact on our workforce? And what does that mean as we do resume our business? Next page, please. Thank you. The government entities, of course, we're somewhat restricted by our governments within our own jurisdictions. And what does that mean for us? And of course, our DMOs and our CBBs that continue to support us, make sure that we have information on within their jurisdictions and what services that they can provide. Next, we shift our focus to risk management and really what the considerations would be as we return to holding face-to-face events. So here we've listed some suggestions as to when we're looking at our contracts with our venues, service providers, how we might have to modify our contracts and our statement of works based on our current environment. Insurance, of course, what is the impact on insurance for those organizers that were fortunate enough to have insurance that covered cancellations in case of pandemics? What does that mean for the future? And that's something that we wanted to make sure that we addressed here. Also, very important is the data that we collect and the importance of the data as we do move forward and how we read that. So the surveying of our audiences, of our service providers, and how they're coping and how we might work together to produce these events. Communication plan, the importance of having a strong communication plan, and of course budgeting, and how do you budget during such uncertain times. Next, please. Our event formats, we've identified as we do move forward, identified the face-to-face, our in-person events, hybrid and virtual digital events, listing different resources as we do resume using these various formats, what the resources are available to us as an industry to be able to produce these types of events. And also, we don't want to lose focus. We've made such great strides in sustainability and social impact with our events. And as we do resume events, we want to reiterate the importance of continuing on with those endeavors, that it's not, that we shouldn't forget the progress that we've made, and it's still achievable as we do enter this period of reinvention of how we host events and trade shows. And then measuring the success of how we move forward. And Mark is going to touch on this. I'm going to move forward here, but he'll speak to we have a case study here about IMEX and Planet IMEX that was successfully run earlier this year, or last year rather. Measuring success, some guidelines of how we measure success and examples of success metrics and performance indicators for various stakeholders as you do resume having events. And then as we look forward to recovery, what is the outlook? What are the alliances that have been formed? One of the things that Amy mentioned is the partnerships that have been formed groups that are working together that may not have traditionally worked together in the past. That's one of the things that lends to the strength of our industry and how we've mobilized and come together as an industry to help each other so that we can resume business. So we do cover and we list some of the resources here as we do continue to recover. Next page, please. The next couple pages, we address questions and key questions as you do resume business that you should ask to your internal stakeholders, as well as your venues, your service providers, official service contractors. What are some of the key questions as you do resume events that you might want to consider asking of those partners? And existing protocols, again, as we mentioned, the UFI report, ICA, AIPC, we have different reports here that we've listed. We wanted to make sure that this was a guide for you, listing the resources that are available in one source for you. Next page, please. We have some practices, and Cathy mentioned that, and Frank will speak to this, that the APAC region has resumed some of holding large events. And so we've listed some of the practices from some of the venues, some of our service providers and contractors, of how they're resuming their events, including the supporting communities, and how and so we have some videos that we've been able to pull together for you for this. Next page, please. And again, just continuing to list the number of resources that are available to you, case studies, advocacy, health and safety, training, as we do look to our reskilling in this new world. What training is available to us as we want to move forward to navigate producing events. Again, more resources here for national public health resources, trying to bring it onto the global nature as we resume global events, putting together some of the resources that we've been able to find to assist you. And then lastly, again, and not least, is the resources from EIC's member organizations, which without them, we wouldn't have a lot of these resources and we wouldn't be able to move forward and resume our business. So we wanted to make sure that you had access to all of those materials. And that is it. So in a nutshell, going through 42 pages in 6 minutes, I think I made it. Can't hear you, Cathy.
It's that mute button. Yeah. Thank you so much again, Kristen. And, certainly, gosh, thanks to the task force, because this was a lot of work for them to put this together. And Mariella, I know that you were behind the scenes really helping this task force. So thank you very much. I do want to also mention that this resource will be continually updated as new information becomes available. So be sure to check back periodically for that new content. And I also want to remind you to enter your questions into the Q&A panel. I see that we are getting some questions in, but as we go through, please make sure that you're entering your questions. And now I want to turn it over to Julie Smith, who is going to tell us about how COVID-19 has affected the official services contractors. Julie, over to you.
Thanks, Cathy. Well, clearly the last year has been challenging like no other year has been for anyone who supplies services to the exhibitions industry. When it comes to official contractors, we tend to operate with very large overheads. We have a lot of large warehouses in many locations. We have a lot of equipment. We have a lot of personnel. So adjusting for what looked to be a very promising year to suddenly a virtual shutdown was extremely challenging for any of the suppliers for the industry. So unfortunately, that led to some pretty significant layoffs within the contractor world. Some locations have been closed permanently, some temporarily. The good news with all this is when there is a bit of a slowdown in work, one has the opportunity to re-examine all of our processes and take a look at what can be done more efficiently. because we still have to continue servicing our clients through this. From the standpoint of suppliers other than contractors, it's been an equally rough year. Some of them will not survive. Some of them are in hibernation, just waiting for the industry to come back, depending upon the location where they service. On the other hand, some of them have been very successful in thought leadership and seeing how they can help the industry move forward. Some examples of that would be, United, who has been very involved in GBAC and cleaning protocols and also security protocols, or Court Furnishings, who's worked very hard to come out with guidelines on furniture selection for physical distancing and what furniture can be easily sanitized, et cetera. ExpoCAD Contractor, who works with most of the large organizations producing shows around the world, worked very closely with a lot of stakeholders to come up with some new guidelines, institutionalizing some of the changes that we need to make for physical distancing. And of course, there's the field of AV contractors, and AV contractors have adjusted very nicely to be serving the virtual world and the hybrid world, and have also built out studios for recording and sharing content. So this has also a very big impact on the workforce. And obviously contractors are supported by a lot of temporary labor throughout the world. It could be hourly labor, it could be union labor, and they have been virtually without work for most of the last year, depending upon the locations that they're in. So what has happened to labor, which will have some short-term and long-term impacts, is that some of the very talented labor that may have, led teams at show site that were a few years away from retirement, or may have worked a few more years if there had been business the last year, have opted to trigger their retirements so that they could get their benefits. So we're losing, those leaders. There are a lot of, great talented workers that maybe had 10 or 15 years in the industry. They've had no work or very little work in the last year. So they've changed careers, and whether they will come back when business starts back up again, or whether we'll lose that talent workforce, is yet to be seen. And some of the training and apprenticeships that help move some of these people forward and give them new skills have been on hold simply because there hasn't been the money and there hasn't been the work to help engender those. The real concern, obviously, is how will we ramp up once work returns? How will we, get the available labor? There's also been a lot of layoffs, as I mentioned, in full-time and management positions. So we're having to look at some unique opportunities, some unique solutions. One of the things that GES has done is we launched a Flex program, which allows people to sign up for project work, because we know that we're going to need people, to assist with individual shows before there's enough work to rehire full-time employees.
Thanks, Julie. And so how will this all impact the relationship between the organizers and suppliers? I know, for instance, IAEE's major American trade show organizers community, MATSO as we call them for short. This is an issue that is really of great concern to them, not only from the perspective of these very large events, but also, the smaller events that are under 250,000 net exhibit space. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that we are quite certain is going to happen right off the bat is that shows are not going to come back the same way right away. There are going to be adjustments on all aspects. For instance, we can pretty much count on the fact that exhibitors and sponsors will spend less, at least starting out of the gate. They may take smaller spaces. When they're designing their spaces, they may have less structure and therefore less freight because they're trying to design them for physical distancing. From a standpoint of planning right now, the cycle is much more compressed. Some of that is purposeful because as contractors, we're trying to manage our clients' budgets so that if there is any threat of a cancellation or postponement, that they don't have unexpected costs. Some of that is simply because there's so many unknowns right now that it's very difficult to make certain decisions relating to floor plans, for instance, until we have more information from the destination. And then there is a process that I think we all need to go through, which is reevaluating everything we do for its value, and its value to our primary stakeholders. While we all love to have the most beautiful show, I've never known an exhibitor go home and say that was the best show I ever went to because of that entrance unit. It was so beautiful. They're going home and saying that they had a great event because of the leads they made, the exposure for their brand, the contacts that they made. And so everything that we need to do, because we're all going to be working with smaller budgets, is going to need to go through that lens of ROI. From a contract standpoint, this is going to be a really significant transition, because there's going to need to be a lot of contract renegotiation, because the shows are not going to look the same. And in some cases, you're going to be negotiating it with someone different than the individual who wrote it with you to begin with, because that person may not be available. So there's that having to rebuild trust. We're going to have to build scalability into contracts, because again, what the show looks like if it occurs in 21 may not be what it looks like in 22, may not be what it looks like in 23. And then there's the concept that this task force has spoken a lot about, which is shared risk. We're all in this together. We're going to have to look at these things very carefully together. We're going to have to figure out how the business models work, because they're going to be upended. And we're going to have to really work closely together to figure out how to move forward in a win-win for everyone. The really good news, because there needs to be some good news, right, is that we know there's a real hunger for in-person events. And we know that one of the aspects of virtual that does not gain the same kind of enthusiasm is perhaps the exhibition side right now. So we know there's a real hunger for that to come back. As I mentioned before, I think that all of the suppliers and hopefully organizers and other support groups that are out there right now, the venues, the DMOs, have spent the last year looking at every process and being really creative about how we can all move forward together. I think there's going to be a greater transparency between partners. I think one of the trends that will probably move forward is we'll see a lot more long-term remote workers. Certainly from the contractor standpoint, this is something we've always been set up to do. We work remotely at show site. We work remotely when we travel. I think you'll see a lot of creative partnerships between suppliers that, whether it's sharing resources, whether it's sharing people, whether it's sharing footprints. And ultimately, as Amy mentioned earlier, and Cathy, I think you alluded to, there's just a lot of open communication and cooperation between all the entities that need to work together to produce successful events going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Certainly, one of the things that I think has been very positive coming out of this experience is the collaboration that's going on within the industry. Even for Expo, which was supposed to have been held in Louisville last year, and GES is our contractor, they were going to work with Fern Exhibitions, another contractor, to help produce our event. But unfortunately, a month out, we had to make that difficult decision to go fully virtual. So also a couple of weeks ago, 3 major competitors, Informa, as well as Tarsus and Clarion, produced a very successful event in Orlando. So 3 major competitors, 3 of almost the largest trade show organizers in the world. If they're able to collaborate, then I think that that all of us can be. So now we're going to turn it over to Frank, who's representing the venue side of the industry, and he is with Kintex in Korea, and it's very early in the morning. So I just want to thank you again for staying up and being with us. And he's going to talk a little bit about the safety protocols that have been implemented. They have been able to hold events, as I mentioned early. And how have you collaborated with your event organizers and partners to implement these protocols, Frank?
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank, and it's an honor and pleasure to share our experience on behalf of Kintex. Kintex is the largest exhibition center, and I'm responsible for marketing and business development. Since the May last year, we have held 55 exhibitions so far, and more than 530,000 visitors have visited. Although 9 individuals infected with COVID-19 visited, not a single infection occurred thanks to our strong safety controls. I would like to speak on 3 points. First, I will introduce our safety protocols and framework for operating the venue during COVID-19. I will also share our community's effort and achievement in order to hold exhibitions consistently despite strict government regulation. Next, yes, thank you. This is our safety protocol. When we implement prevention activities, we divide the space into 3 stages: venue entrance, lobby, and event space. Venue is responsible for the venue entrance and lobby, and the organizer is in charge of the event space regarding prevention activity and expense. On average, our venue has spent about $20,000 every month on prevention costs. The key to successful implementation is that no one can remove their mask from the moment they enter the venue until they leave. Wearing plastic gloves is also mandatory. We developed our own QR access control system to receive information from all visitors for tracking, and those showing signs of the virus were not allowed to enter. Body temperature checks have to be done twice at the entrance of the venue and the exhibition hall, while all entrances and exits were separated so that no foot traffic lines were facing each other. In addition, outside air was continuously ventilated indoors to ensure good ventilation. To adopt the new normal, we also invested in virtual and hybrid event infrastructure. Please refer to the slide for more detailed activities. But it has to be mentioned that no matter how perfectly the venue and organizer prepared, the government is strongly regulating people's gatherings, so exhibitions cannot be held without successfully persuading the government to permit them. Next, please. This is our framework for operating the venue. Local authority, venue, organizer, and DMO became a team and communicated transparently. We created a prevention manual which had to be done, which has to be updated continuously in accordance with government guidelines and changing circumstances. As a result, the manual has been revised to the 10th edition. Still, if any problem was found, we voluntarily worked day and night so that it could be corrected and improved immediately. As a result, public and government trust what we do, and it became the basis for continuing events. Even so, due to the increase in infections, there were many cases in which the government issued an order to ban gatherings, which meant all exhibitions cannot be held. I think this is because the government official thought exhibition is not business or trade platform, but one of the mass gatherings. So our community got really angry. So what we did was we did everything possible. Our community gathered together and made various efforts such as press conference, petitions, and demonstrations to catch the attention of politicians and the government, which empathized that exhibitions are essential economic activities and much safer than department stores or shopping malls from nearly every perspective, such as ceiling height, passage width, ventilation, density control, and identification tracking. As a result, our government enacted new sustainable guidelines for exhibitions from November last year. Next, please. If you look at this table at level 1, with fewer than 100 new COVID-19 infections, there is no limit on the number of visitors by space. At level 1.5 and 2, with less than 400 new infections, 1 person per 4 square meters is permitted, which is not too bad for organizers. They can still open their events. Although exhibitions were allowed to be held up to level 2.5, permitting only one person per 16 square meters doesn't make sense in reality. So our community also protested today. We have 8 exhibition and meeting related associations. They all came together and calling for the deregulation and compensation for losses. We do expect improved guidelines will come out soon. Next, please. As I mentioned earlier, holding an exhibition is not possible based on only the power of the venue and organizer alone. It is important that every industry stakeholder will have to work together to ensure that government continue to improve exhibition-related guidelines. Although the situation is different in every country and city, I think it is if everyone work together, it will be able to overcome this crisis wisely. And I hope our case has helped. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Do you have any, just very briefly, do you have any recommendations for venues that are looking to host exhibitions?
Well, you can find a lot of very detailed, strict, well-made manual from all around the world. So there is actually no problem for prevention activities. You can just follow them, but you have to really work close to your local government because they are always looking at you, and if they are always looking for the problem that can be occurred, so you have to always communicate with them transparently, and also you have to give them trust before you open the event, because it's always up to them. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so now we're going to go over for the DMO CVB perspective. We have Sheila Neal here. And, you know, in many ways, DMOs act as the great connectors of our industry, bringing together event and exhibition organizers with all of our service partners. And it's necessary for, you know, delivering those exceptional experiences that we are all accustomed to providing our audiences. So, Sheila, in the past year, how has the role of the DMO changed, and how are you helping to facilitate conversations with the event partners to champion the idea that we are all in this together?
Great question. So, you know, we began the journey in 2020 having an outstanding year, you know, full of conversations, innovative ideas, you know, a stellar booking time. So we thought it was going to be amazing. All destinations were looking at this, as well as Detroit. And then the bottom dropped out. We had to shift our conversation from rates and dates, and the conversation then went into listening to the customers. We had to really find out how they were doing personally and professionally. So, you know, our title as a Convention and Visitors Bureau changed, and as a hotelier, it then became a counselor, a connector, a mediator. And when I say a mediator, I'm speaking specifically with the hotel community, with sponsors that they had packages with the convention center to have those conversations, with the medical community, because so many things were actually changing, and we had to stay attuned and astute to what the medical community was saying, and then translate that to our customers. Also politically, I mean, we were talking about the pandemic, but a lot went on in 2020 politically, so we had to stay astute as to what was going on politically. Then with the religious community, and then government officials, because as things changed and we're opening up and not opening up, we needed to communicate that to the customer. And at times we became a legal advisor, just saying, you know what, well, this is what it says. You need to take it and make sure you're translating that into what it needs to be instituted to host your convention. So we looked at the customers as our partners. And as a partner, we wanted them to know that we were ready and prepared for them whenever they were ready to make the decision to come back. And that facilitated us to have many conversations. And really, we had to increase our communication. Communication. That became the drill. And with that, we did it with a couple of ways. As DMOs is all around the country, and then specifically in Detroit, we created a monthly newsletter where we were speaking to them as far as what was going on. We had virtual meetings. And I say virtual, why it was so important is because a phone call is important, but actually when you can see a person, it gives that connection with them. And that's one of the things we did. And with that meeting that we had with them one-on-one, We then brought in the hospitality community. So it would be the hotels, it would also be the convention center, and all those who were part of that potential decision making. And then they needed to feel comfortable that we were a partner with them as they made those decisions. So the quarterly check-in just wasn't for 2021. It went to 21 and 22, because as you heard some of the panelists talk earlier, this is a process where the decisions of contract negotiations is going to go further than 2021. And we wanted them to feel that we were with them. And then we had to keep them aware of the stages of reopening. There were stages where we were open and then we weren't. And then as a community, you needed to let that customer or partner know how they were feeling. So those conversations became something that was vital, and it became something that was important. And then we had to share with them new safety initiatives. So some of them weren't aware what EIC was doing or other industry icons were doing. So we had to share that with our customers and partners so that they were aware of that, and then they could make good decisions. And we were instituting great safety measures as well with our convention center. And then last but not least, I would have to say one of our partners, Delta Airlines, meeting with our transportation, because people want to travel, they want to meet, but they want to feel safe. So Delta was an amazing partner with us, and we did have meetings with them. And the fact that it's no secret that they kept the middle seat open. And as a person who actually did travel at times during the pandemic, that was a comfort zone. So I have to say that staying astute to what was going on in the industry and communicating that with the customer. And then Cathy, last, it's important to have candid, intentional conversations, because the decisions that that customer was making was going to impact our hotel community, our convention center, and the region. And not having that candid conversation could possibly mean that they could have brought a piece of business into our destination if that person would have canceled earlier. So the conversations had to start early. And then last but not least, I want to say a huge thank you to our hotels that actually had to stay open through this pandemic. If you think about it, it was very hard for them to make good decisions during that time, but they did so staying open, staying alert, staying happy, and welcoming people in, and making sure that communities stayed together. So the CVBs and hotels that had to stay open through a global pandemic, through racial injustice, and then through governmental changes, hats off to them, hats off.
Yeah, certainly, we appreciate you and the partnerships that we have with all of our DMO partners. So thank you very much for everything that you did and are doing for the event organizers, as well as the hotels and all your other partners. Now we're going to switch over to Stephanie Jones. Stephanie, you host an annual citywide in-person event, WEFTech, which typically draws over 20,000 people and includes a large exhibition. And in 2020, you hosted it as a virtual event, and now in 2021, you're planning on having a hybrid program. Can you tell us a little bit about your event, how your stakeholders, including attendees, exhibitors, and suppliers, have responded to the different formats, and specifically, what has worked well and what has room for improvement?
Sure, Cathy, thank you so much. So originally we were planning WEFTech to be a hybrid event. It was scheduled for September of 2020, so we had our rose-colored glasses on, and we thought we may be able to pull it off. But as we saw that COVID continued to spread across the country, we switched to all virtual at about the 10-week out mark. So, we had a big lift to convert to all virtual. This was our first time planning a virtual event, and ultimately many of the elements were very successful. We had almost 6,000 attendees, 284 exhibitors, which equals about 28% of what our in-person event normally draws. And we were able to retain 58% of our sponsors. So we were very happy with that outcome. Our community really rallied around us, and they gave us that trust to experiment with this virtual format. So we condensed the schedule down from 5 days to 3 days, and because we eliminated Saturday and Sunday, with people working from home, trying to balance that work-life balance, and kids at home, we thought that they would value their free time on the weekend. Our program featured the usual mix of live, simulated live with Q&A and pre-recorded content, which are available on the platform for a full year. But the live and the simulated live content were the most well received. Not so much with the pre-recorded content. We didn't see very much engagement there. We also added paid exhibitor demos for the first time ever, and these were very well received by the exhibitors. We held live discussion groups that were basically off of the platform using Zoom, and then we offered networking roundtables that were hosted on the platform using a tool called Whereby. So these formats worked very well, and they were the most popular among attendees and exhibitors. So what we saw with the virtual was that people were drawn to any opportunity to connect with each other in some type of live setting. What did not work so well was the virtual exhibit hall. And I think those of us that switched to virtual last year kind of saw the same thing. Our exhibitors were not happy with the lack of engagement from attendees, and they didn't feel that they received a good return on their investment. So I think the industry has some work to do there. Our platform offered, the AI recommendations. We had the opportunities for one-on-one meetings, but I honestly think that the learning curve that both our exhibitors and attendees experienced was a huge barrier to adoption. So ultimately, we had only about 20% of our meeting invites being accepted. And of course, that did not make our exhibitors happy at all. So one thing we did do that had been a request from our exhibitors for several years was to offer a 2-hour block of time that was dedicated each day for just attendees to visit the exhibit hall. That seemed to go over really well with our exhibitors and our attendees. So I think we will be continuing to do that in our hybrid and our face-to-face event this year. So I think, again, just ultimately improving engagement with virtual exhibit booths is an area where show organizers and our suppliers and partners can work together to improve moving forward. When we talk about the social networking and engagement components, they also didn't do very well. We had a trivia night, a happy hour, but ultimately attendance was very low at both of these events. Somewhere between 2 and 4% of the total audience participated. So networking and engagement is a big challenge facing the industry for virtual events. And
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I couldn't agree more that online marketplace, it's something that I think that, we need to work on if we're going to continue offering that online. So,
exactly.
Certainly that's a huge challenge, and we need to figure that out. So thank you very much for that information. So now we're going to turn it over to Mark Mulligan, who's with IMEX, and IMEX made that decision to shift to a digital platform in 2020. What have been some of the learnings you've had from the experience, and specifically on helping to strengthen the sense of community in our industry?
Yes, thanks, Cathy. After we made the difficult decision to cancel IMEX Frankfurt in March 2020, we still had a really strong sense that people were desperate to connect, and we wanted to make up in some small way for the cancellation of the show. So whatever we decided to do, we agreed that it would be a gift to the global events community. And in determining our strategy for a virtual offering, we settled upon 3 strategic priorities around which we would frame our decision making. Planet IMEX needed to be unique to IMEX. It needed to foster connections and communities, and we wanted it to bring some joy at such a devastating time for the whole industry. Our overriding principle was to unite the industry with a virtual event that would appeal to our audience regardless of the state of their business. And so we decided that we would offer a multi-day program centered around quality educational content and complemented by peer-to-peer networking functions and an AI-driven matchmaking feature. We also made an early decision to give Planet IMEX a personality that reflected us as a company. So we commissioned the design of 3 3D islands, each with a natural theme from which users could navigate to their chosen content. Just like our live shows, the user experience was absolutely critical to our mission, and we felt that this almost gamified the experience for our audience. We took the playfulness to another level in the October edition, opening the week with Monday Fun Day, a day of fun activities and experiences curated by the IMEX team with support from our great partners. Through a mix of on-demand and live experiences, including live latte art, a vineyard tour, helicopter rides, and even a poetry recital from one of our own staff, who's a published author. The idea was that we wanted to offer something for everyone, regardless of title, sector, whether a buyer or supplier, even whether employed or not. So in terms of learnings, it was a roller coaster for sure. The first thing was to make the quick adjustment to remote working. We had less than 10 weeks from the cancellation of IMEX Frankfurt to Planet IMEX Week. This meant revisiting skills like brainstorming and creative sessions to see how this was best achieved in a virtual way from our homes. We found that working with technology providers is really quite different to working with venues or general service contractors. And so project management as a discipline became a real focus for the whole team. And of course, we had to redeploy our teams that were highly optimized for the delivery of trade shows in a more agile project-based structure. Clear and timely decision-making was crucial, especially given the limitations on production resources from our suppliers, who were dealing with unprecedented demand from many other organisers just like us. We learned a lot about ourselves as a team, and in many cases we discovered new talents and skills that had not been utilised before. I myself ended up running speaker green rooms via our streaming platform, which I initially found absolutely terrifying, but eventually grew to quite enjoy. And we had other sub-teams who stepped forward as in capacities such as session moderators, or who use their experience to shape user journeys or design the registration process. In actual fact, when I look back, this was an exercise in team building, crisis management, and upskilling all in one. So overall, we had about 6,000 attendees to each event. And interestingly, around 40% of those were people who had not attended our live shows before. So we do consider Planet IMEX to be successful in both uniting our community and expanding our audience. And I think as we look forward to IMEX America this November, we hope that that will pay dividends.
Thank you very much. You know, certainly we're looking forward to IMEX this year in October. And for those of us who also attend the one in Frankfurt, we look forward to attending that again next year. Our final presenter is Adam Anderson, who is with Informa, and Informa organizes exhibitions in many global regions. And I'm going to ask Adam to tell us about some of the regional differences that you're observing when it comes to hosting in-person exhibitions or digital hybrid alternatives. And I also want you to talk about the All Secure guidelines and success metrics.
Great, thank you, Cathy, and hi, everybody. As mentioned, as Cathy mentioned, I am Adam Anderson with Informa Markets, which is the predominantly exhibitions-led business within Informa, and I'm based in Amsterdam. And for context, I lead a global portfolio of 9 events in the pharmaceutical supply chain, with 5 of those events in Asia, 3 of those events in the EMEA region, and 1 in North America in Philadelphia. So as everyone mentioned on the call, the global events industry with international attendance obviously been incredibly challenged, and which is, from our perspective, has also created some opportunities. And like event organizers globally of every scale and size and shape, we've pivoted, which is probably an overused term, but we have pivoted to digital I think, really accelerate our digital growth over the past year to keep our markets and our communities engaged and our stakeholders. And I think as we were in that sense, we were very reactive in the past year, particularly my group. I feel like we were, scrambling to find solutions and work on the best options in different markets and different regions, and how to best put that together. And now we're, with that experience behind us, being more proactive and intentional about platforms we use or the way we go to market, whether it's with a webinar or a virtual event or a hybrid event. And what we've learned from 2020 to learn to 2021. And I think as Sheila and Mark and somebody and Julia mentioned on the call, communication has just been critical with global colleagues and partners and customers and venues and vendors. And as Sheila said very well, it's a partnership. And I mean, I think a successful event of any type, any size and shape is defined by successful partnerships and with everybody. And so I think with that in mind, we've really used that as our how we moved to digital for many events, but then also created solutions that are unique, whether it was language differences across the world and being able to serve audiences for predominantly one language. Within our Japanese show, we needed to do a solution mostly in Japanese and not having it in English. Or in China, where we've created a platform where we had it open for several months at a time to create opportunities for sourcing in the supply chain there. And a hybrid events has also allowed us to hold events successfully. For example, in my portfolio, we had an event in China in December, which allowed us really to have a event predominantly successful event for a domestic audience, but having an international audience engaged digitally with those who were there in the domestic audience. So some very successful metrics around that. And coming up in the next month, we have April, I should say, we have our Japan show doing a similar, having the show live for domestic and some limited Asia international attendees. Will be international audience hybrid. And I think we're just finding different levels of engagement, how people want to engage in terms of those regional difference that you were asking about, Cathy. I think for one of our larger events that rotates around Europe every year, we went for a 2-week virtual event in terms of last fall to almost replace that event. I think we probably were very ambitious about what that looked like, and realizing that so many of our successful sponsors and stakeholders are finding success also in just doing simple webinars. So I think it's really important to really define your metrics around your success and ask your customers and all your stakeholders and your association partners what really creates success for them. We've had some really successful hybrid events and live events over the last few months. As you mentioned, Cathy, we had our pop-up fashion event in partnership with Tarsus and Clarion in Orlando just a couple weeks ago. We've had shows in China. We've had shows in Japan recently, and our outdoor Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show recently, which is all having levels of success in terms of hybrid activity, having live events blended with a virtual audience or hybrid audience, digital audience, however you prefer to say that, joining in and participating in different ways. And all of that really serves as a good background to talk about All Secure, which is the approach we're taking to creating a better health and safety environment and standards in all of our Informa events following COVID-19. And it really gives guidelines for everyone from exhibitors, speakers, sponsors, visitors, and delegates to come to our events to connect and learn and do business, but also really do it effectively and safely. And so these were guidelines that were developed as an industry standard and collaboratively by UFI, AEO, and CISO, event organizers. We collaborated with Reed and Clarion on this, with input from a range of event venues and suppliers, and input from health and government and local authorities. And I think when you think about health and safety and holding events, and even whether it's a completely in-person event or a hybrid event, I think the guiding principle is always whatever the local authorities and government are allowing you to do. And as our CEO said a long time ago, first you need permission, then you need confidence. And I think that's been something that I've thought about quite a bit Stephen is very eloquent with his words. We always need to have a permission locally, and then we will build that confidence through our safety and knowing that we can deliver on our leads and our successful programs we develop. And I will go, there's very extensive documents on many industry websites, and happy to share that with the group. There's the CISA website and other websites have the all secure documents, or you can just Google all secure to find that, but I'll happily share that in the chat here. But really it's focused on creating a safe environment, giving people the tools and foundations to be successful, and giving them the confidence to deliver events and hold events in different locations. And like I said, as mentioned, continue to develop that with adapting to local regulations as things continue to change and we emerge from this. I think, you know, the UK announcement this week was very exciting, and obviously that will have a big impact on health and safety regulations as shows begin to look at returning there starting in June. You know, and I think that the overall, I'll close on this, but as I mentioned earlier, but success in the exhibitions and events is a partnership, and we view this as a baseline for our health and safety, but we work with all of our partners, including our venue, general contractors, local health authorities, and making sure that, you know, above all, that our exhibitors, our visitors, and our partners really understand what that means for them, and also really understanding and being adaptable. And we've had a lot of our exhibitors ask us questions on what else they can do, and I think it's important knowing you can be firm on what you can be flexible on and really being successful, and also at that same time knowing that people want to be comfortable where they are, where so they might feel comfortable about doing something from their home office, or from their more comfortable being there in person. I think we found that with a lot of our portfolios, we've been able to engage a larger and broader audience by having hybrid events to really give people that comfort of saying, come join us in person or join us from the comfort of your home office or your office, wherever you may be, whatever is permitted in your area, but do join us and as part of your community, continue to expand our breadth and reach. So that's all I'll wrap up with there.
Thanks very much, Adam. So lots going on, and I see in the chat, you know, people are asking about how to access these documents. Make sure that you check the guide. Some of them may already be in there, but we will also look to make sure that anything that isn't in there does get added. So now we're going to move over to the Q&A portion of the program, and I will be facilitating these questions, and I know that we just have about 25 minutes left. So as we move through these questions, I see that we have about 31 right now. Let's see if we could just keep the comments down to maybe a minute each, if at all possible. But Adam, I'm going to throw this first one to you about showing proof of a negative PCR test, and how are we able to do that with, especially here in the U.S. with the HIPAA guidelines? How can you require that?
Oh, good question. I'm probably not entirely the best person on that because I haven't had a show in the U.S., but we are planning our show in August in Philadelphia. You know, I know we did that at our pop-up show in Orlando, and I know it was very, very well received. I'm not sure I can actually, I'm happy to look into that and get back to everyone on that. But my understanding is it went very well with the terms and condition agreement that everybody was able to sign. They were able to also encompass privacy. We take privacy very seriously in terms of data, and obviously want to comply with HIPAA and everything else. So I'm happy to look into that further and come back to that specific question.
Yeah, thanks. I can say that I was on a webinar on Wednesday where there was a case study provided on the event in Orlando where they did require a negative PCR test, either I think it was 72 hours before the event, and if they couldn't show that, then they were tested on site with a quick test. And based on what I heard, that the testing was very well received by everyone. So I certainly think that, you know, anyone attending an event would like to have that knowledge that others were tested negative. Julie, I'm going to throw this to you. What specific exhibit hall guidelines will exhibitors start seeing that might be required to build their booths?
Thanks, Kathy. Well, so far, this is actually an area that has not had a lot of guidelines issued. Now, I actually wrote a blog on this recently with some recommendations I think that in general, we're recommending that exhibitors look at their structures, see how they can have fewer structures within their booth if they're unnecessary, see if they can have some sort of a host in the front of a larger booth. There are a number of different guidelines on how to train your staff on cleanliness, how to make sure that there's hand sanitizer available, directional signage to move through larger booths, et cetera. But thus far, most groups haven't focused on what the exhibitors themselves are doing within their booths. There are a lot of exhibitors looking for information on this.
Great, thanks, thank you. I'm going to ask any of you to respond to this. In your opinion, with the increase in vaccination numbers, do you see protocols weakening, or will those sanitary precautions stay forever?
Cathy, I'll say a little bit. I think it's going to depend on jurisdiction. Depending on where you're meeting in this world, how strict the guidelines are going to be as people become vaccinated. Some countries are going to have their vaccines out and distributed and administered much quicker than others. So it really is going to depend on where you're meeting. But also, and it goes back to what Adam was saying and many others were saying, it's that comfort level of your audience and your duty of care as an event organizer as to building that trust so that they will return and come to your event, physically. Versus in a virtual form. So I think it's a matter of partnering and understanding what the limitations and what restrictions might be for your jurisdiction at the time of which you're meeting. But in the long run, I do think that some precautions are going to remain as trust is built and people do resume and feel comfortable going back to, I don't know if we can say business as normal, if there is going to be a business of normal and what that's going to look like in the future.
Yeah, I think for the foreseeable future, I don't think anything is going to change, unfortunately. So, Frank, I'm going to give this next question to you. How do you handle meal functions with mask requirements? Are you doing buffets, prepackaged meals, or outdoors? What's your recommendations?
Well, it's different a bit. It's different in exhibition and meeting, but when it comes to exhibition, basically the meal you cannot even try the food exhibit. So we just there were several months before there was a Seoul cafe show, but they have to taste coffee or things like that, but they made separated like a testing zone. So the zone should be how can I say, should be monitored by their medical staff, and also it has to be disinfected every hour. So the only in that space you can taste the coffee or F&B. So we operate the separated zone like that.
Great, thank you. For Adam, do you have any insights on how F&B is being handled?
I know planning some future events coming up in Europe this year. We've got things like box lunches and things like that are going to be how we're going to handle a lot of the F&B, which is, I saw the comment in there, someone saying, F&B to drive traffic. I know a lot of my previous portfolio used to put, bars and food at different places. And I'm sure that definitely is a big change in terms of how people react to events, and that can change traffic flows and floor plans and so many things as we create these great experiences. So I think it's going to challenge all of us to think a little bit differently, be more creative, and how are we driving quality and really making sure that I think there's things that Julie said, there's going to be change in the industry of like how we look at things, and not just taking things for granted, but not assuming things, and really challenging ourselves and how we get better. And as we we've said it many times in our group, is like, how do we become better at what we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple questions in here about some of the protocols that we're discussing would be good for flu prevention as well as other infectious diseases. And that's absolutely the case. I'm going to give a shout out. Julie mentioned the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, and they have a fundamentals course that you can take online. It's about 4 hours. They're getting ready to release the second edition of this. Many of our staff have gone through it. And this new edition of this fundamentals online course is going to handle other infectious diseases like hepatitis C and tuberculosis. So I would suggest that not only the event organizers putting some of their staff through this course, but any service providers as well. So that would be my tip there. Let me see. What about as the events industry begins launching again, does the industry see any trends in reducing attendance fees to encourage more attendees to attend the live event? Anybody want to comment on that?
I'm happy to comment on that, Cathy. I think it probably depends on the market and if you have an expectation of paying for an event. And we were discussing this recently. I think for some events, it might mean if somebody's paid for something, they're more likely to attend. And if you are adding things in like testing or anything else, or you're giving them masks or any other health and safety type items, that might be a way to make sure that they come and that you're collecting all their correct information so that you can have the best event possible.
Anybody else want to comment?
Cathy, I think I agree with Adam. You know, we're looking at that, and as our programs and events change, especially if we are cutting back on food and beverage, which is usually one of the most, financial impacts that we see, we may try to do that. Yes, I think that is a consideration because we do want to encourage in-person attendees, and that we know that the cost to attend is one of the primary barriers.
Cathy,
yeah, some of the things, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a good comment in the chat that whether in person or online, we need to sell on value, ideally, not on price.
Exactly.
That's a great comment. All right, so here's a question, again, back to anybody who wants to answer it in terms of what you are seeing, but with social distancing and restrictions on the number of people who could be in a venue at one time, do any of you have any plans on reducing the amount of exhibit space used or put a maximum of the size of booth offered? I think just how are you thinking about handling just the number of people on the show at any one time, as well as how the floor plan might change?
So Cathy, if I can sort of try to address that question, we are not looking at limiting the number of people on the show floor, specifically because we feel that the exhibit halls have that necessary ventilation. The HEPA filters, they have all of that in place that would help with the airborne transmission of COVID. But what we are looking at is how we set up our show floor. So we're having much more wider aisles, one-way traffic aisles. We are minimizing the number of 10 by 10 inline booths. We're trying to establish space between those. So I think we're trying to address the crowd density from that aspect on how we lay out the floor plan, at least for the moment, until things change.
I would agree with that. I think there are many other mitigating measures that we can take with our exhibitors with a constructive and open dialogue. It doesn't necessarily have to be the crowd density that's the issue. So I think lots of different ways working with the exhibitors, cleaning protocols, show design, using outdoor spaces, which is something that we're looking at very closely. Anything to give that sense and that confidence in the safety of the environment.
Thank you. Sheila, this one's for you. What is the DMO? What is your role in all of this as it relates to safety protocols that might be in place?
So similar to what I mentioned, staying astute to some of the protocols and making sure they're instituted actually in the region. So the GBOC program definitely is one of them. And then working with the convention centers to find out what other programs that they have in place. For instance, I know that we just had a volleyball championship there, and instead of having it all concentrated at one convention center, we moved it between multiple convention centers. So that way, one, based on our guidelines for what we could host, we were still meeting those guidelines with the government, but then having more of the sanitizers around, the different entryways they're coming in, doing temperature checks. So making sure that you have some of those pieces in place, but also talking to the customers ahead of time to see who's going to cover those costs. Because I think that's one thing we haven't talked about with more safety measures. You have to have what's in place at your particular properties, but then also what additional features you can actually provide to them. And if they want to partake in those, like the temperature checks or the scannings and things of that nature that are actually out in the industry to make sure that those attendees and exhibitors feel comfortable hosting their meeting or during that event.
Thanks, Sheila. I see a couple of questions in here. Yes, the webinar will be recorded for you to refer back to. Also was asked to give the information again on the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, GBAC. You can Google GBAC and it will pop right up and you can find the information there. How are you handling your staff for the organizers? What are you doing with them, if anything, differently? I heard a comment on this webinar that I was on Wednesday that one organizer increased the per diem for their staff so that they could order hotel room service, so that they would not have to go out to restaurants. They did different things for the staff room that would provide the staff that safe distancing. So those are some considerations. And also the staff, it being perhaps volunteer-based. If the staff person does not feel comfortable going, they would find others. And so those were some of the things that I heard on a webinar. And there's also a lot in here about certainly travel restrictions that are still in effect with many companies, but the research that we are seeing is, as it was mentioned, there's a lot of pent-up demand for getting back to business. Some of the exhibitors exhibit at shows where it's absolutely necessary for the visitors there to make their purchasing decisions and to purchase products. So that is something that we are seeing, a lot of pent-up demand. Would anyone be able to share the online portals that they are using to have attendees submit their negative PCR test? There are, and we can get that information back out. Maybe we can include that information in the guide. There are some. Certainly, I know that Fern has a service. Julie, are you familiar with any other companies that are offering PCR tests, or any of the other panelists?
I am not. Adam, how about through? I know you've done a number.
I've got companies that will do a PCR test or that will store the information. Is that the question, Cathy?
Yes, I know that Abbott Labs is one that's doing it. There was also a suggestion, which can increase the cost, is to have the local health department there so that they can ensure that the test is being administered properly. If it is administered properly, I heard that it was 98% effective, or correct. So I think that's an important consideration.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're looking at right now is in the many countries where we have shows for my group is what is that country requiring for people to travel to, and how are we addressing that, or so if you already have to have a PCR test to get into a country, get on an airplane, then you're probably going to be okay uploading that to an app, whether it's provided through a registration company or whoever else that can store that. So I think we're looking at all of that one process. I think it's really a good time to look at customer journeys all the way through and think about that experience. And I keep thinking about, what if somebody arrives at an event and they've tested positive after, how are you securing them, making others feel secure? There's so many factors to think about that. But I think, as always, it's important to think about your customer experience, but really think about someone from the moment they leave their home until they get to your event, and how do you make them feel safe and secure? Give them the tools digitally to be able to do that and be able to be there and be successful.
Anybody else want to comment? All right, there's a question here about liability clauses for exhibit applications, as well as registration to prevent the association or company. Any thoughts on that? I can say that for IAEE, we do have liability clauses, waiver of liability in both our exhibitor contracts as well as on our attendee registration form. I do suggest that you do seek the counsel of your attorney for the correct language. I can also tell you that here in the United States, at least, the new Exhibitions and Conferences Alliance is advocating in Washington, D.C. for liability protection for these events. So it seems that one half of Congress is in favor of it, and is as can be expected, the other side is not. So anyway, that is one that we're working on here, and I'm sure in other countries as well. What about IMEX, Mark? Are you doing anything?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're looking at the moment, along with a whole raft of different contractual considerations. But I think it's very difficult at the moment because it's such a rapidly moving situation, and we're still 8 months or more away from the show. So, like with lots of the safety measures, we're looking at everything, and we'll do everything that's required to make people to ensure that people are safe and that they feel safe at the show.
Yes, and certainly, just because there is a liability waiver doesn't mean that you you won't be sued. So, but it is good to have that in your contracts. Sheila, this is for you, and you've answered it a little bit, but the difference between public events like a cheerleading competition in terms of security measures and, associations or independent organizer shows. So what are you seeing as the differences between these two?
I'm going to say first and foremost, based on the destination, the governmental guidelines are different. So literally, we have had to become little attorneys in going through the governmental guidelines. So for sporting events, they can host one type of event. For association events, it's another type. So in talking to other CBBs, it's different in every destination. Now with the sporting event, because they're so spread out, still even from the aspect, they gave an example that when they took their mask off to do a certain component, they couldn't go back and get that mask. Another person actually was covered with the mask and brought it to them. So there was specific details that were done to keep them safe. Now with the association meetings, because we're limited right now, but we actually have a plan for when it comes back. The goal is going to be able to find out when it opens up, which we think is a little later, how we're going to be able to facilitate it coming through the doors because it's such a large venue. We're definitely still going to be doing the scanning and the temperature checks, but waiting until what the government states is the stipulation as far as what you have to do, which I think in most destinations is also going to be a component in what we're going to execute. I would say it seems a little bit more lenient in sporting events.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all the time that we have today for our Q&A, and I want to thank each of you again. I know that, it takes a lot of time to prepare for these webinars, and everybody's really busy trying to get back to business. So thank you all very much, and thanks to the attendees that were listening in. And now I'm going to turn it back to Amy Calvert.
So thank you, Cathy. Fantastic job moderating. Thank you. Special thank you to Julie and Adam, Mark, Kristen, Frank, and Sheila and Stephanie for being on the panel today and your work to pull this resource together. Thank you to our participants. Great engagement and dialogue in the chat, and really fantastic questions coming our way. I would just remind everybody that the purpose of this task force and the work that we're doing is to aggregate and curate and to help people understand how, not necessarily when, and to encourage open and really some generous dialogue about what are the things that we're learning and that we need to continue to share with one another as we advance through this time, and again reinforce this notion of partnership to strengthen our industry and to come out of this even stronger than we were a year prior. So as difficult as it's been, I continue to be inspired not only by our incredible volunteers, but the amazing people in our industry that are sharing their knowledge, sharing of their time so that we are better informed and continue to feel connected to one another and to look forward to when we are together again. And to borrow a saying that my friend David Peckinpah put forth, this time together over Zoom and on these webinars definitely fills the gap, but it doesn't fill the void. I know we're all really looking forward to being back together. Hopefully we'll all be together at IMEX America in Las Vegas, if not sooner. So everyone, again, be well, take care, and stay connected.
Those are wise words, Amy. That concludes today's webinar. On behalf of the Event Industry Council, I would like to thank all of our panelists once more. The EIC will be sending you your CE 1 week after the conclusion of this webinar, and it will be available for playback on the EIC YouTube channel if you would like to watch it again. We'll also be launching registration for EIC's 2020 Global Awards event soon, so be on the lookout for the announcement next week. This webinar will now end. Thank you, everyone.